Continuing on with our drashas on Pirkei Avos, Perek Beis, Mishnah Beis. The Tana says that Yegias Shneim Mashkachas Oven. Tov Torah im derech eretz, sheyegias Shneim Mashkachas Oven. The toil, the labor of both Torah and derech eretz will be mashkachas oven, will allow us and enable us to leave and depart and forget about our veras. Explains the Bar Tanura that if we are miyageya, if we toil and labor in Torah and learning Torah, ba'amal v'yageya, wholeheartedly, and the pursuit of our livelihood, that will weaken our desire. It will weaken our desire both in the nefesh and in the guf, and therefore we will forget about averis. The Yetzer Hara will not cleave to us, will not attach to us. We'll be able to forget about the averis. Who has time for the averis? Who has a desire for them? Who has a koyach for the averis? The Yegiya of Shneim Mashkachas Oven Torah im derech eretz. And the Bar Tanura explains that really the Yegiya in derech eretz would not be necessary, but a person needs a livelihood. Really, the Yegiya in Torah would be sufficient. If a person would be omal in Limudat Torah wholeheartedly, Yomim v'Layla, then that would be sufficient. That would be sufficient to enable us to depart from the averas. But a person needs a livelihood, so he needs to be me'ageya in derech eretz as well. But perhaps we can explain it slightly different, in a slightly different manner, slightly differently, a different dimension of mashkachas oven. That the oven that's being referred to by the Tana, the oven is the specific avera, the source of all averas, the oven of the chet of Adam Rishon. The chet of Adam Rishon, where we were all punished for all future generations with the klola of Yegias Apecha Teichol Lechem. That we would have to toil for our sustenance, that we have to labor with the sweat of our brow for our livelihood. And that's the oven that's being referred to by the Tana. That the Yegiya that we were punished with the Yegiya because of that Avera, the Avera of Adam Rishon, the eating from the Eitz Hadas. Explains Rav Dessler Zatzal in Mechtav Melio. He explains that, of course, Chas v'Sholem, the punishments of the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's not an akama, it's not a chazorias, it's not to make us suffer, but it's a tikkun. It's a healing. It's a healing for neshama. It's to rectify the damage that was caused by the avera. Every avera causes a damage in our neshama, causes a pagam in our neshama. And the chet of Adam Rishon, the tikkun for that avera was Yegias Apecha. Why? Why is that so? Why was the remedy, the refuah for that chet Yegiya? That we have to toil, the sweat of our brow. Explains Rav Dessler that the chet of Adam Rishon, the source of it was that while he was in Gan Eden, he was removed from Ra. And he was removed from Teva and from nature. But he wanted to experience Teva. He wanted to experience Ra. The Rebbeinu Shalom said that not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, he wanted to experience that. Experience Teva, nature, Olam Hazeh. Experience Olam Hazeh. Experience the Olam Agashmi. To see what it is to see Ra. The tikkun for that avera is to toil and labor in the olam agashmi, in the olam ateva, work for your livelihood, for your parnasa, labor toil for your parnasa b'zeyas hapecha, with the sweat of your brow, and you'll see. And you'll see if you're erlach, if you're an Ovid Hashem, if you're a Yirah Shamayim, you'll see that despite all your efforts and all your toil and your labor and your sweat, it'll all come down at the end of the day to Siyata D'Shmaya. You'll see the Yad Hashem in the Teva. You wanted to see Olam Hazeh, you wanted to see Teva that was severed, that was divorced from Ruchni, that was divorced and separated, severed from the Olam HaRuchni, separated from the Rebbeinu Shalom. You'll see, you'll sweat wholeheartedly, your whole life will be devoted to it, and at the end of the day you'll see that it's all Siyata D'Shmaya. You'll see the Olam HaRuchni in the Olam HaGashmi. You'll see the Yad Hashem in the Olam Hazeh. And that will be the tikkun of your Avera. You want it to be attached to the Olam Hazeh, to the Olam HaGashmi. You want it to separate yourself from the Olam HaRuchni. You'll see that you'll devote yourself totally to this livelihood, to the parnasa that previously you had as a gift from Hashem without any effort whatsoever. You'll toil and labor, and you'll see it's all Yad Hashem anyway. It's all Yad Hashem, it's all Siyata D'Shmaya, and that will be the tikkun of the chet of Adam Rishon. And that'll be our tikkun. To see the Ruchni in the Olam HaGashmi, to see the Ruchni in everything, to see the Yad Hashem in everything. And that's the tikkun for the Avera, that's our tikkun. And the Gaon says, in Mishlei, he says, the Yegias HaPecha, Toichal Lechem, this Gzeira of Omel V'Yegia, that we have to toil and labor, the sweat of our brow, this applies to Limud Torah as well. Prior to the chet of Adam Rishon, had it not been for the chet of Adam Rishon, Limud Torah could be achieved, and Ruchni could be achieved without Omel V'Yegia, without sweat and toil and suffering. But after the chet, there was a gzeira on Limud Torah as well. The Pasuk in Mishlei says, Lu l'chu lachmu belachmi. That Torah is called my lechem, it's called lechem, and just like in the processing of lechem, of bread, there's so much labor and it has to be processed, the planting, the harvesting, the ksiram, winnowing, sifting, etc., all the different stages of the plowing and planting and harvesting and winnowing and sifting, all that applies in Limud Torah, the Omel V'Yegia, and sifting out and refining the Divrei Torah, the learning till we come to the emes, to the halacha brura. And the Ikar Omel V'Yegia that a person has to do is Limud Torah. But in any event, there's a gzeira of Omel V'Yegia. There's a gzeira that we have to work. We have to work and toil and labor with the sweat of our brow. And that's something that we all have to do. Some can be zoicha that their ikar Omel V'Yegia is Limud Torah. Yom V'Layla is Limud Torah. Others are kevei itim l'Torah, but they have to be Omel V'Yegia in Parnasa. But in any event, we all have to toil and labor. And we all have to toil and labor for the purpose of coming closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Whether it's be'ikar in Limud Torah, Avodas Hashem Yom V'Layla, whether it's kevei itim l'Torah and being me'ageya in Parnasa, but that has to be the purpose, to come closer to Hashem. And a person, and every person, has to know where his function is, what his function is. He has to know what his path is, what his tchunas nefesh is, what he's most capable and most suitable for, and he has to follow that course and that path. And whatever path it is, it has to be done l'shem shamayim. This past year, the Corona year, Klal Yisrael suffered some terrible losses. And one of the tragic losses that we suffered was the loss of our great Godel, our great Tzaddik, Rabbi Dovid Hofstedter, Zecher Tzaddik Levrocha. On one of my visits to him, he shared with me the following anecdote. He said that in Brisk, he said that the minhag was that by Yom Kippur night they used to say Tehillim the whole night. They used to recite the entire Tehillim through the night. That was a minhag in Brisk. So there was a ma'aseh with the Beis HaLevi, that there was a certain gvir in Brisk that was known as a very wealthy person, but very stingy, and he did not give tzedakah as he should have. He didn't open his hand and support the aniyim, the moises, the way he should. Yom Kippur night, he was there in the Beis Medrash, and with kavana reciting Tehillim with kavana Yom Kippur night, like he was amongst the Talmidei Chachamim Chashuvim of the Beis Medrash. The Briskerov, the Beis HaLevi approached this gvir and said to him, you know that every army has its divisions. There's different divisions in every army. And some are infantry, some are cavalry. Nowadays we would say some are the Air Force, some are the tank battalions. An army has to have different divisions. And the soldier in the army can't jump from division to division. If there aren't clear lines of the divisions of the army can't function. And they can't properly defend or attack. A soldier has to know what battalion he belongs to, what division he belongs to, and he has to be faithful and carry out his duties wholeheartedly and faithfully within that regiment. He said, your division is to support Aniyim, to support Torah, to be nice ba'ol, to open your hand. And Rabbi Shalom gave you Shefa and Parnasa. That's your function, that's your role. You're jumping divisions. You're saying Tehillim now with those who are Terasim Nosan. You have to know what your function is, and you have to know what your purpose is. In a similar vein, in a more lighthearted vein, I once heard from Rav Simcha Wasserman Zatzal. He told me the following anecdote. He said he was in Los Angeles. He lived in Los Angeles for a time. He built a yeshiva in Los Angeles. And there was an occasion where he was at a Sheva Brachas. And it was a Chassidish affair, a Chassidish Chasam V'Kala. And he was invited as the Rosh Yeshiva in Los Angeles, and he came, and he was there in the Sheva Brachas. One of the participants in the Suda was a member, perhaps a leader of a group that was not faithful to the Torah, to the Messiah, that introduced deviations in the Torah, modern interpretations, and deviated from the Messiah of the Torah. So this individual was sitting close to Rav Simcha by the Sheva Brachas, and he was chattering him a little bit, and he said to him, Litvish Rosh Yeshiva, son of Rav Elchanan, here participating in a Hasidic Sheva Brachas. Are you talking? So he was needling him, he wanted to raise him on. So Rav Simcha, of course, in his usual manner, was not fazed, was not ruffled. He said very calmly, he said, there's no problem, there's no stira to this. We're all part of the army of Hashem. In an army, you have to have different battalions. There has to be an Air Force, there has to be a tank division, there has to be infantry, there has to be all kinds of different divisions in an army in order for it to function properly. But we're all working for the same goal. We're all working for Avodas Hashem. We're in the army of the Rabbeinu Shalom, and we all have respect for one another. We're all part of the same army, and we all serve our functions, and we're part of this great, glorious army of the Rabbeinu Shalom. So this individual said, wow, that's wonderful, and where does our group fit into this army of Hashem? Are we also part of this army? And Rav Simcha smiled and he says, of course you are. Every army has their cowards. Every army has their traitors. You're also part of this army. You're part of the battalion of the division of traitors. Traitors from the Messiah, from the army of Hashem. We should all be zeicha to find our particular purpose and be Oved Hashem wholeheartedly and see the Yad Hashem in everything that we do.